Good morning. I had a great question about selecting cells, moving them, copying them, and there's some great quick tips for this. So I'm just going to open up a blank spreadsheet and show you some things that a lot of people don't realize, and it's going to make hopefully life a little bit easier. I'm going to start off with just a little bit of data in here. I'm going to just type 1, 2, 3, right? And you can see as I typed that in and I hit the enter key to complete that entry that the cell has this green border around it. And of course, if you've been working in Excel, you know that means that the cell is selected. So I can select multiple cells. I just, of course, click and drag. And what confuses a lot of people is the purple shading here because it looks like this very first cell is not selected, but it is. You know that because of the green border that goes around. That's what tells you what's selected. You can also double check that by seeing that we're in column C and rows 2, 3, and 4 have content selected because they're all shaded as well. Now that I have them selected, all that was to get to this border that goes around the cell. And this border is very, very tricky. And I'm going to make my screen even larger so that you can really focus on this border. Notice that my mouse is a puffy white plus sign. Say that 3 times fast. Puffy white plus sign. But when I move it, it changes shape. Whoops. And if I move my mouse a little, what I did a minute ago is I lifted my hand up and my mouse jumped a little bit. It moved a little bit. And that changes the shape. So when I am directly on top of that green border, notice that I have what I call four-sided arrow. And four-sided arrow does something very special. It is it's a different kind of special than if I get my mouse over what I'm going to call right now the notch. See how this corner down here has a notch on it? They actually call this the fill handle. When I move my mouse over that little notch, the little fill handle, instead of puffy white plus sign, I have thin black crosshair. But you know what? If I go up ever so slightly, four-sided arrow. Off just a little, ever so slightly, puffy white plus sign. And the trick here is that those different shapes mean something different is going to happen. So your mouse skills here are going to be hugely important. So you might already be familiar with this fill handle, this notch, and I'm going to zoom back out because some people, if you're not familiar with this, you'll love it. When you put your mouse over the notch, so what is the mouse shape? Thin black crosshair. When I'm in that position, if I move, if my hand is off a little bit, I change focus, not going to work. Change focus, not going to work. Have to be thin black crosshair. When I get in that configuration, if I press and hold the mouse button down and drag, I get that smart autofill, right? Shall I undo? Let me undo that and I'll just go back to the 3. So that's one of the great functions of that. But if I'm anywhere else on this border, I can be on any part of this border. If I move my mouse, let's say right on top of the border right here, and I press and I drag, do you see how the green border seems to be following my mouse? Now I have my mouse button firmly held down, and when I get into that position, I have moved the contents of my cells, and that is very handy. It just makes, sometimes you just need to grab something and move it over one column, or you need to grab a group of cells and slide them down a little bit, and that just makes life so easy. If you do that by accident. Sometimes people move it by accident, or if you move it to the wrong location, something goes wonky. Undo is our friend, right? The keyboard shortcut Control Z. When you're kids and you play kickball and you say I get a do-over and it becomes a do for a do-over, well, that's a Control Z nowadays. That's a Control Z. So you just put that right back. Now what if I really want to get fancy and I don't want to just move it, I want to copy it? Why don't you add a key to your mouse selection. Currently, I'm holding down the control key on my keyboard, the control key. And so when I'm holding the control key down, do you see when I move my mouse near that edge, I have the mouse pointer and it's got a little plus sign next to it. And that is the cue that I'm about to copy. So now when I press and drag with my control key still held down and my control key is still held down and release, now I have a copy. And so that might save you some work because you've got something set up the way you like it. You select it and you just hold your control key down and drag it to where you want to go and it will make a copy. So these are kind of some fun tips. Now I'm going to show you just a little extra, more than you paid for. No, I'm just I'm just teasing. For the low cost of free, I hope that this is helpful. So I have my cells selected and I showed you a moment ago, and I'm zooming out pretty far, but I'm going to grab that notch or that fill handle and I'm going to just, drag down to about a count of 30 so that I have some data here. And what starts to happen sometimes is that, in fact, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna clean this up. I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to select this again, and I'm even going to use my fill handle to go across. And it copied because it couldn't see a pattern, so it just copied all that data across. So I just need some data to work with. I have a big table, right? That happens a lot in our business environment. And what starts to happen sometimes is we start to drag and select things. Now remember that first cell is selected, right? And as we're doing all this, it starts to become just too much because we're actually working in the screen at more a normal view where we can see. And so I don't know if have I gone all the way over and I have to kind of keep bumping the edge to try to get it to go over a little bit more, and it starts to get confusing. I mean, am I at the end of my data? I don't know. Okay, well now I am, but but I really had to kind of work at that, right? So I want to show you something kind of clever. I'm going to click on I don't know, this first cell here, and I'm not going to use my mouse to select at all. I'm going to move my mouse off to the side. Now keep your eyes over there on the left where I've got cell C2 selected. If I use my arrow keys, I'm just changing the cell. But I want to select. So if I hold my Shift key down and I arrow down, I am selecting. If I arrow back up, I'm deselecting. If I arrow to the left, to the right, I am selecting as long as I have my Shift key held down. Isn't that kind of clever? Now, if you get good with your keyboard shortcuts, you could select what you needed to select, Control C to copy, click someplace, Control V as in victory to paste. Right? So you get really precise using the keyboard. Another little trick is when you keep your hands on the keyboard, it reduces your errors a little bit because you're not moving your hands off of the keyboard over to your mouse. You're still moving them around a little bit, but the more you can stay on the keyboard, you tend to be a little bit more accurate, tend to be faster also. Okay, so what did I do again? How do you get rid of those marching ants? That's what those are called. You hit escape and they'll go away. They're just letting you know that you could paste again if you needed to. So anytime I'm, got a cell selected, hold my Shift key down and arrow, and that's going to select, right? Now, I can bump that up even more to put it on steroids. If I hold my Shift key down and I down arrow, I move one cell at a time. If I also hold my Control key down, so currently I have held down Control and then Shift, and now I press my down arrow, it went to the end of the data. Isn't that cool? What if now I still have Control, I can lift up, but if I can, I shouldn't have lifted up. If I hold Control and Shift down again and I arrow to the right, that's the end of the data. If I Control right again, the right arrow, across everything I had selected, it said I don't see another column of data. So it went out to what I call the end of the universe, the very last column in Excel. And that happens to us sometimes, and you get this reaction like, where'd my data go? Where'd my data go? It's gone. Right? Because all you see is these blank cells. Well, of course, you can control home to go back to cell A1. Well, as long as I have everything selected, control shift, and I'm just going to left arrow, and that's going to take me back. So here's what's happening. Here's what I'm trying to demonstrate. If I have a gap in my data, see how I created a gap there? Oops, let me zoom in a little. You can't see. Let me zoom in. Then as I, oops. What's going on here? Okay. Then I'm going to click this cell. If I shift an arrow, that's one cell. If I control and shift, it doesn't jump to the end of the column. It jumps to the gap. Then I have to keep my control shift held down and arrow again, and it jumps to the next piece of data. What do you think is going to happen when I press control shift again, or control shift arrow again? It jumps to the end of the data. So whenever it gets to a hole in the data, some blank cells, it's going to stop. It's just something to know. If I control shift down arrow again, whoops, end of the universe, because it went looking through that column for data. It didn't find any, so it went to the end. If I control shift and up arrow, it goes back to that last piece of data that it found. And if I keep my control shift. Anyway, so those are just kind of some things that put your keyboard on steroids, that make you a really power user and allow you to move through things very quickly. So far what we've talked about is the shift key. We've talked about control shift, but we didn't talk about control by itself, other than to say that it helps us to copy. Right? We did that a minute ago. So just to review, when I selected a grouping of cells and I put my mouse over the border, I can move it. But if I hold my control key down, then I can copy it as I drag. What's my undo keyboard shortcut? Control Z, Control Z. I'm going to Control Z again. Oops. And let's see if I can Control Z back, and oh, it's just doing my, there I go. I wanted my data back in there. Okay, so here's your next kind of tip with the control key. Sometimes you need to add groups of numbers that are not contiguous, meaning they do not all touch each other. Okay, so perhaps this is January. I know this is microscopic, right? You probably can't see that. I'm going to select those. I'm going to use my magical fill handle, thin black target sign, press and drag, and it's going to fill in. It goes through December, and then it knows to start over. It goes to January, right? Let me amplify that just a little bit. And so I'm going to do something magical. I'm going to sum up all these rows, or all these columns, I'm sorry. And since there's no data, if these had any kind of formulas already in it, it tends to kind of screw it up. I'm going to select all these blank cells, and I'm going to hit the auto sum. And it better give me the right totals down here, and it does, so they all total to the correct thing. As I click down here at the bottom on these different values, I'm not looking at the bottom, I'm looking at the top, because I want to make sure that the formula is summing what it should be summing. And so maybe this data was all different, and it was much more interesting than just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 type data. And I wanted to add up my January totals down here. Let me I'm going to bold those, and I'm going to put them in yellow. There we go. Okay, so maybe I want to sum up my January values, and those two values are not located next to each other. I mean, here's my January column, maybe that's last January, and maybe this is the January before that. And I, excuse me, I want to sum up those two values. And we all love that auto sum feature, but normally when we auto sum, we need the data to be next to each other, right? And it's not. So what do? Well, I'm going to display that answer here. I'm going to say January totals, and I'm going to display it right here. So I'm going to click my auto sum button. It's guessing. It guesses completely wrong, so I'm just going to ignore what it guessed at. I'm going to click my January value. I'm going to hold my control key down, and I'm going to click my other January value. And do you see how it added it into the formula? So when I have my control key held down, it allows me to select cells that are not touching each other, right? So I'm going to hit enter to total that. So quite simply put, if I select a cell, hold my control key down, select another cell, select another, as I continue to click, these are all being added into my selection. Pick a different color here. How about orange? No, how about something prettier? How about green? See how it selected all of those and it shaded just the ones I had selected green? Well, I can hold my control key down, and keep on clicking, and these will all be added into my selection. If I realize I didn't mean to do that, I can click it again. It doesn't always work real well to deselect. It should have deselected. Let's see. We'll see if it actually deselected. How about some kind of orange? Nope, it did remain selected. I think it selected it twice is what I think it did. Okay, so that is true if you have a group of cells. So I'm just dragging over that group of cells, and if I hold my control key down and I drag over this group of cells, then they are selected. I could sum them, average them, whatever. I really messed up. I don't know where it inserted that total, so I'm going to Control Z to do that. But just a little bit about how powerful that keyboard is, and some powerful tips for selecting with the keyboard, but also some powerful tips for selecting and then moving, which is the four-sided. Oops, yeah, you got to be precise though. Moving is the four-sided arrow. Copy is hold the control key down. Move it right there. Okay. And shift, another great thing, I'm going to undo. Okay. Here's another great thing about shift. This is a very big spreadsheet. If I click on January, I can hold the shift key down on my keyboard, and I can click the end of the range, and it will select everything in between. If I wanted to use the keyboard for that, I might be up here on this cell and think through this. I want to select everything in that column. I know I need shift to select. Control will take me to the end of the column. And that was down arrow. Control shift down arrow. Keeping control shift held down, right arrow. It's another way to select that whole table. Especially if you find that you're having to scroll a lot to get to the end of your gigantic worksheet, then start with the first cell, Control Shift down arrow, keep Control Shift held down, arrow to the right. Voila! So I hope that is helpful, and I know that's going to help a lot of students in my classes. So I'm going to post this video and enjoy.